This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to update and upgrade our Edgar Markov Vampire Tribal EDH deck. Thank you for joining us for another installment of the Up and Up series. Today we've got Edgar Markov and 4 cards going in and 4 cards coming out. But before doing so, let me make you aware that in the description of this video right down here, there are links to this build's deck tech, the up-to-the-minute deck list, as well as Edgar's video primer series. So we've got 4 in, that means 4 coming out, and the first card going in is going to help us to fix our Mardu mana, and that is Shattered Landscape. This land can tap for a colorless mana, or we can tap and sacrifice it to search our library for a basic mountain, plains, or swamp card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So this is an improved version of Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse because we can use the land right away for some colorless mana if needed, or if we want to just make sure we can fix the mana, although the land comes into play tapped, it still does help us to fix our mana. And if we draw this and don't really need the land at the time, we can always just pay Mardu colors, that's a red, white, and a black, discard it, and draw a card through its cycling ability. With Shattered Landscape going into the 99, you know a land is going to come out, and it's simply going to replace a basic swamp, because let's face it, we can use the Shattered Landscape to fix the other colors of mana, because this deck is skewed towards black mana, so that we can cast our vampire spells very early in the game, and Shattered Landscape will help us to get the plains or the mountain cards that we may need to cast further spells during the game. Alright, card number 2. That card is... Let's not try to spoil the 4th and final card of this event. Card number 2 is Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter. Here we have an elusive, good utility vampire for just 1 mana. It's a red mana to cast on a 2/1 body, and we can pay a generic mana and a red and discard a card and sacrifice a vampire to draw 2 cards. We can activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. Note that that does not have to be during our turn. It does not have the dreaded only activate as a sorcery ability. It's not stapled here, so if opponent 1 attacks opponent 2 and opponent 2 loses some life, we can pay that 1 and a red mana, discard a card, sacrifice a vampire, which most likely will be one of the tokens made by Edgar, and then draw 2 cards. Getting rid of unnecessary cards in our hand and sacrificing expendable creature tokens to get more cards into our hand is only going to help us cast more and more powerful vampire spells, triggering Edgar, flooding our side of the battlefield with vampires, and eventually pushing us to victory. And that's all on the body of a 2/1 for 1 red mana. With the Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter going in, it is replacing the Knight of the Ebon Legion. Now, this was a 1-on-1 straight swap. 1 vampire with a mana value of 1 out for 1 vampire with a mana value of 1. And the reason for that is that Knight of the Ebon Legion is just working for itself. We can, it's a 1/2, so we get a better body on the 2/1. It has the ability to pay 2 and a black mana to give it +3/+3 and Death Touch until end of turn. And at the beginning of our end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, we put a +1/+1 counter on Knight of the Ebon Legion. The problem with Knight of the Ebon Legion in this particular build is that it doesn't help out the team. It doesn't help with any resources. It only helps itself. And when we have a tribal deck that's built on tribal synergies, in addition to some sub-themes that are woven in, like +1/+1 counter, dispersal, and life gain, if the other cards that are in the build are not helping to contribute to those overall themes, then at this point in this build's evolution, they are deemed unnecessary and obsolete. So the do-it-itself Knight of Ebon Legion is being replaced by the resource-granting Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter. Alright, card number 3 is going to go in, but in so doing, it will spoil card number 4. So we're going to pull a change up, an audible. We're going to skip card 3 and go right to card 4. Card 4 going into this Edgar Markov build, excuse me, it is Ohertak Deepest Foundation. Here we have a 6/6 legendary god for 4 and 2 white mana. Now, before you light me up in the comment section as to why we're squeezing in a god when this is a vampire tribal build, which honestly is something that I don't usually do. I'm usually pretty staunch when it comes to building tribal decks, in that if the creature is not the creature if the creature isn't the creature type in question, it usually does not have a shot getting into the 99. Well, here I think we can make a difference because of the block of text under the vigilance mechanic that's on Ohertak. If one or more creature tokens would be created under our control, 3 times that many of those tokens are created instead. So even though this is a 6 mana spell, it's not really going to help us out in the early game. This is going to be one of those cards that we have in our back pockets to help rebuild our side of the battlefield after it gets wiped out by one of our opponents. We're looking to build a very wide and tall army of vampires. It is only a matter of time until they get wiped off the face of the battlefield. Ohertak will help us to replenish those fallen vampires much more quickly by allowing us to create triple the number of tokens each time we cast a vampire spell by triggering Edgar Markov. And in addition, this god is a little more difficult to get rid of. Even though it doesn't have indestructible, if it does die, we return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed into Temple of Civilization, which is a land that can tap for a white mana, or we can pay 2 generic mana and a white and tap it to transform the Temple of Civilization back into Ohertak, but we can only do that if we attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn and only as a sorcery. The attacking with 3 creatures or more, that should not be a problem in this kind of build because that's exactly what we're trying to do. And the sorcery speed thing, that's not that bad of a drawback because we get this card onto our side of the battlefield. It untaps. We go to our next turn. We send our creatures into combat. It transforms. Then we have it for our post-combat main phase. We cast a vampire spell or 2, get triple the vampire tokens because of Ohertak triggering off of Edgar. I am looking forward to getting this onto the battlefield during the mid to late game and just watching our opponents squeeze their hands because they're not going to have enough removal spells outside of like a dedicated, Esper control removal deck. And even that, I challenge that we could come out on top. With Ohertak going in, and yes, it is not a vampire, I get that, but the ability that's on it is going to help our vampires immensely. Ohertak is in, and it is going to replace a card that's a bit slower in this kind of build. We are really a build that wants to operate fast out of the gates and have no cards or very few cards in our hand that we need for a mid to late game as we anticipate those board wipes. This card is one of those cards that I usually grip in my hand because I would rather spend the mana to cast vampire spells because I don't think I get enough advantage because the game just doesn't go on that long. So Ohertak is in. Phyrexia Arena is going to come out. Everyone, we know about this enchantment. 1 and 2 black mana at the beginning of our upkeep. We draw a card and we lose 1 life. So at the beginning of our turn, this puts an extra card into our hand at the loss of 1 life, which is not a big deal, especially in a build with a lifelink sub-theme woven into it. But like I said earlier, this is slower for us. We are a very fast deck. Remember, we don't need Edgar on our side of the battlefield to trigger him because of his Eminence ability. He can just sit in the command zone gathering dust. And then at the very end of the game, if we know we have things cinched up, we can cast him, get him into play with the haste, put +1/+1 counters on everything, and swing for game-ending lethal combat damage. With Phyrexian Arena, we're investing the 3 mana, which isn't doing anything for us until the beginning of our next turn, whereas that 3 mana could go to casting 1 or more vampire spells, which gives us more vampire creature tokens. So my thought is, Ohertak is a much better mid to late game card and will give us a lot more on our side of the battlefield and for our resources than Phyrexia Arena will do turn by turn by turn. All right, MTGBC, we got one more card left to go into the 99 of this Edgar build to close out our video, and that card is, yes, the Sanguine Evangelist. Here we have a Vampire Cleric for 2 and 1 white mana. It has the Battle Cry mechanic, a nice mechanic to bring back from way back in the day. If you're unfamiliar with what Battle Cry is, it's whenever a creature with Battle Cry attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So although we may lose the Sanguine Evangelist to combat, it's going to buff all of those other attacking vampires, particularly the expendable 1/1 tokens provided by Edgar Markov's Eminence ability. In addition, when Sanguine Evangelist enters the battlefield or dies, we create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. Although this isn't a bat deck, it is going to help with a little evasive body that we can also send into combat. It won't get any of our vampire synergies, but still, it's another little flyer that we can float around towards our opponent's sides of the battlefield, or it's one that we can just hold back as a potential chump blocker. Either way, Sanguine Evangelist helps with our combat theme and leaves a body when it provides a body when it ETBs and provides a body when it leaves. Well, when it dies. Not when it, because it could get exiled and not produce the bat. It has to actually die. With the Sanguine Evangelist in, the card coming out is Vampire of the Dire Moon. So, similar to what we said about Knight of the Ebon Legion, it's getting harder and harder to reconcile or justify the presence of vampires that aren't helping out with the team. Yes, this is a lifelinker, and yes, we do have a lifelinking theme woven into this, sub-theme woven into this build, but it's just not doing enough. The Sanguine Evangelist does so much more for us because it helps out the team in combat, provides 2 bodies if it does end up going to the graveyard, where here we just have a 1/1 that has lifelink and death touch. That's it. So similar to Knight of the Ebon Legion, it's a creature upon itself. Well, that's what Vampire of the Dire Moon is as well. It's a creature to itself, and it's not doing enough to justify its continued presence in this Edgar Markov build. All right, there you have it, MTGBC. 4 new cards going into our Edgar Markov build. Let me know your thoughts about these additions in the comments section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.